Okay, today is 6/6/2024 at 3:30, and I'm here with.
George Trevelyan.
And George, what is your occupation?
I'm an oyster farmer.
Was that kind of your dream job to be an oyster farmer, or did you have another occupation before this?
I was an abalone farmer before I switched to oysters. I was working up at the abalone farm in Cayucos for 17 years. And during the recession in 2009, my department, I was their research and development department, and they just cut that because of financial woes. And so I saw there was an old oyster farm that was derelict, kind of going out of business and was for sale. And so I bought the farm in 2009. Yeah,
That's awesome. Yeah.
yeah.
Had you been doing any fishing or abalone diving when you worked at the ab farm, or was that already closed by then?
Yeah, I was a marine biology student, back in the 1980s and 70s at UC Santa Barbara, and aquaculture was all the rage then, and we were going to save the world, feed the world, and it was super exciting time to be a marine biologist. And I was an avid surfer and was really excited about doing something in the ocean and feeding people and growing food in the ocean. And so the whole idea of aquaculture and farming the oceans was really exciting to a whole cohort of us young people, and we got into it then, and I've been doing aquaculture ever since.
That's cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you still surf?
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah,
Longboard,
yeah. So it's a good
shortboard?
place to be. Yeah, I my board's progressively been getting longer as I get older.
Yeah, yeah. I just started
Oh,
on
really?
a longboard. Yeah,
Yeah, that's a great way to start too.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's been good the past couple days.
Oh, I know. I really want to get out there.
You should.
Been too busy.
Yeah. And backtracking a little bit,
Uh-huh.
where were you born?
I was born in San Pedro, California, so I'm a Californian. And when I was 7, we moved to San Diego area, to Coronado, and so got to live by the beach my whole life. Yeah.
How did you get here to Morro Bay?
Um, I did a stint out of college on the East Coast managing an oyster hatchery on the Chesapeake Bay, and that oyster farm went bankrupt because of a disease. And I ended up back here with living with my family, with my parents for 6 months and applying for work out here. And we had 3 little kids, then my wife and I. And I got offered a job at the abalone farm in Cayucos, um, and I jumped on that. Yeah.
So
And so
oyster.
we came up from San Diego to Cayucos to grow abalone at the abalone farm.
So you've had
Yeah,
experience like previous with oysters and everything.
yeah, I did. I yes.
Was it always oysters that you wanted to do, or is there
Just I've been
any other?
interested in shellfish and um, uh, oysters, mussels, clams, abalone, seaweeds, things like that.
Mhm. And so that job in the East Coast was your first real job, kind of
Yeah, out of
exploring
college.
that whole
That's
thing.
right. Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you tell me anything about that? What were they were doing? What was the disease? Just kind of what was going on over
Yeah,
there?
the Chesapeake Bay is just huge, and it used to have just massive populations of oysters, and they were really just a not a luxury item, but really a staple food for people living in the area for centuries. But slowly, Chesapeake Bay got more polluted, and and the fishing got more and more intense. And so the oyster fishery died out there, and so we were trying to grow a really high quality oyster and using a hatchery to produce a special breed of oyster on the Chesapeake Bay that would grow faster. And it all went well until a disease called dermo. It's a protozoan parasite, got attacked our crop, and basically all the oysters died. And our investors got cold feet and decided to pull the plug, even though the farm was only 2 years old. And so that's what happened.
Mm.
Yeah.
And then you come out here to
Mhm.
Morro Bay.
Yeah.
In just, I guess, terms of how it's laid out, has the harbor changed at all from when you got here? Like, has you know, makeup of the boats or the piers, any work being done there, or any new buildings getting put up?
Um, I I bought the farm in 2009, so it's been 15 years, and the bay hasn't changed much at all. You know, there's just people come and go, boats come and go, but uh, when I first started, the oyster beds were there, and we've worked hard to kind of modernize the oyster farming methods and to produce more oysters, um, and so uh, yeah.
And
Mhm.
your customers, do you don't often come into the shop, do you? Or
Mhm.
is that the case?
Yeah, so we have a little oyster store here where people can come in and buy local fresh oysters and also clams. We also produce manila clams on our farm. And so locals and tourists can come in and get locally grown oysters and clams right here. And I work on all the different aspects of the business, you know, the financial aspects and the payroll and all the boring things and insurance and all the stuff that I have to handle.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also get to go out on the farm quite a bit too and work with the planting of seed oysters and the thinning of the crops and the grading and sorting and harvesting of the oysters.
And uh, do you think that the customers that you see here are like tourists mostly, or are they like repeat locals?
Yeah, it's both. It's a real mix. And on certain days, like on Thursdays, today's a Thursday, we have locals and regulars that come in to get their oysters for the weekend. And Fridays also, people who know about our clams and people that are buying oysters and clams in the shell to take home to cook are the locals. And then we also serve oysters on the half shell here and roasted oysters here. So and we get a lot of locals and tourists doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
And so,
And a lot of people just come out on the wharf here just to hang out too.
mhm.
Yeah.
And you just have this one location, is that
Hmm.
correct?
Yeah. We're really lucky to have our own little store where we can sell our own seafood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, these when you're out in the oyster beds and everything,
Uh huh.
can you describe for me, like, uh, I guess, like the planting process, like how, or like
Yeah.
oyster, and then oysters, like their lifetime, like how they grow, and what you
Yeah.
do to support them?
So we have to buy baby oysters. They don't breed here naturally. And so we buy little tiny 2 millimeter long oysters that cost about 1.5 pennies each. And we buy them from a hatchery. And the hatcheries are in various places. There's one in Humboldt Bay, and there's another one on the big island of Hawaii. And they ship them overnight, FedEx, in a cooler, and we'll get 250,000 baby oysters in a little styrofoam box. and then we have to know how to handle those and care for them so they'll turn into a whole acre of oysters, that number of oysters. So we start them in a nursery system where they're protected from predators, and we can watch them and tend them and grade them and sort them and thin them out until finally, after about 4 or 5 months, they're about an inch long. And then they're ready to go out to the big leagues, back out to the farm. And that early nursery phase is done here at the marina at on a boat slip. But there are strict rules about growing out oysters for human consumption. They have to be grown. The health department requires the location to be in a certified oyster bed that has known good water quality and that's far away from boats and marinas and things like that where there's potential sources of pollution. And so we move the oysters out at 1 inch and grow them for another 8, 9 months, or 1 to 2, between 8 months up to another 2 years, depending on the size of oyster and their growth rate. So
You do that in the back bay,
and we do that in the back bay on our leased oyster beds, which we lease from the state of California's Fish and Game Commission. They lease out these parcels called state water bottoms that are in different bays. There are some in Tamales Bay and some here in Morro Bay. Mm-hmm.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And so every like the Fish and Game or Fish and Wildlife is always you're working very closely with them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they are the landlord that has that we pay, and we pay currently $9,000 a year for the right to grow oysters on this leases in the back bay. Yeah.
Do you ship them? I mean, do you ship like once you've grown them and everything? Do you ship them out somewhere, or is it just this
We
location?
do. We distribute them to restaurants all along the Embarcadero here in Morro Bay, first of all, and then secondly, in our region, the wine country, Paso Robles, San Luis Obispo, Pismo Beach, and then when our crop is big enough, then we drive further south to Santa Barbara and Oxnard so that we can link into the bigger markets in LA.
Do you do that like yourself, or do you sell it to like a wholesaler who will then like bring it down? Or is
We
it
do it
in-house?
ourselves,
Okay.
but we work with a wholesaler in Oxnard that can distribute to a lot of different restaurants.
Has it ever been an option to grow the oysters or breed the oysters here yourself, or is that just it's
Yeah, I
too
mean,
small of an
I
operation?
managed a hatchery once. I know how to do that, but it's a pretty expensive undertaking. You have to have a really nice facility and um, devote a lot of time and money and labor to uh, to growing these microscopic oyster larvae that have to be fed just the right diet of live phytoplankton that you have to be able to grow. We have Cal Poly and Sea Grant Extension officer named um, uh, Kevin Johnson, and Kevin is an expert hatchery guy, and he has an experimental hatchery on the Cal Poly Pier in Port San Luis in Avila.
Oh wow.
So that's pretty exciting that he can produce at least experimental levels of quantities of oyster uh, juveniles or seed,
Does he sell those
and he
to
can
you?
also produce clams and other things that he's interested in researching. And so we're working with him on experimental basis to produce native oysters. The species we grow is called Pacific oyster. It's originally from Japan. It's a big, fast-growing oyster. But we do have a small native oyster that lives along the coast of California, and and he found they're very rare in Morro Bay, but Kevin Johnson found some enough and got a permit to collect some and breed them and produce some progeny and raise them, and he gave me some to grow on experimental basis. So that's fun.
Have they grown already, or
Yeah,
are you in the
yeah, they're
process?
already a couple inches long, and they look really nice.
That's cool. Yeah. And kind of going back again, the abalone farm.
Yeah.
Can you describe, I guess, once you finished with that job out in the East Coast,
Yeah.
come back, and I guess you're still kind of fresh out of college,
Uh-huh.
and just how that experience, how did that go for you, the abalone
Yeah,
farm?
the abalone farm in Cayucos was really a historic facility. It was one of the oldest abalone farms in the world that got started in the 60s. And there were some real pioneers involved that with that. And so,
Do you remember any of those names of those guys?
well, Frank Oakes ran it, and he was Cal Poly graduate. And David Layton was the biologist who was kind of the brains behind the breeding of the abalone, um, who who had a long history here in California of doing aquaculture and abalone and other species. So David Layton and a few others were involved with were the founders, and the John Alexander was the landowner who owned land right on the beautiful bluff of by Villa Creek Road in Cayucos, north of Cayucos. And he was really also a key person because he was super interested in developing the aquaculture of abalone, and so he supported the project too. Yeah.
And what were you doing?
And so
Yeah.
I was hired to help solve problems in the hatchery and work on nutrition and disease and other aspects of raising the abalone.
And
Yeah.
it's now shut down. Do you remember when that was, and what happened, and why it was shut down?
Yeah. So it had a pretty long run, and it did really well for quite a long time, selling a lot of these red abalone to Japan. And when I was there, we were constantly giving tours to people, and we would have these foreign, people from China and Japan and South Korea, and over time, the South Koreans just became really, really good at growing abalone too, and they developed methods that were much less expensive than what it cost us to grow abalone and ship them to Japan, which was our main market. And so, uh, we couldn't compete. One of the factors was that we couldn't compete with the less expensive abalone coming out of South Korea. Uh, and so, uh, they're close, and they can just put the abalone on a ferry and take them over to Japan. And and the way that we grew abalone in Cayucos was in tanks on land, up about 50-foot elevation above sea level. So the cost of pumping the seawater, massive amounts of seawater through those tanks, and also aerating the tanks so that, because the abalone need cold, flowing seawater that's bubbling with lots of agitation and water movement and lots of aeration, and it's all really expensive to provide that kind of um, environment for the abalone. And if you had a location where you could have cages right in the water, it's a lot less expensive. And so there were abalone growers on a small scale right here in Morro Bay back in the 80s also. And but the bay here isn't the right environment because during heavy winter storms the salinity gets too low for abalone, and they all puff up through osmosis, osmotic shock, and die. And so you need a really special environment where you have really high quality, cold, full strength seawater, but you can also put them in cages right in the water where you're not having to pump the water.
Mm.
And that's tricky to find in California.
I was also told there was something to do with like a parasite that
Yeah,
also.
I did a lot of work on that. There was uh, a worm called the sabellid worm that was originally from South Africa, and another abalone breeder went to South Africa and brought back South African abalone to breed them before this sabellid worm had ever been described by science and wasn't known, it wasn't in the literature. And in the South African abalone, it doesn't cause any trouble. It's just kind of a commensal, little tiny worm that lives in the shell. Lives in little tiny burrows in the shell, and it's not really noticeable. But in California, it got into the farmed red abalone. I don't. It's never been seen in the wild red abalone though. So it never got into the wild, as far as I know. But it did get into. We bought baby red abalone from this hatchery guy, and that must have had some of these worms, and it spread through our farm and caused uh, the abalone to be really infested with these worms, and they didn't have a good defense mechanism against these little worms, and the shell would kind of grow inward and wouldn't be able to keep growing, and the shell quality would get all porous and bad, and so it was really devastating to the abalone farm. That was a big problem. I developed a way to treat it using. We were trying to find a way. There was no, there's no medicine or anything you could give to the abalone or treat them with that would kill the worms and not make and have the abalone still safe to eat. There was nothing that we could use that was FDA approved or anything. But I found while I was scratching my head trying to figure out what to do about it, I had a bar of surf wax on the windowsill, and I just waxed the surface of the abalone, and it plugged all the little holes, and every worm died, and the abalone started growing really nicely. And so I developed a wax treatment, and we waxed over 1 million red abalone.
Wow. Who'd have thought? Surf wax.
Yeah, so once again, surfing comes to the rescue.
Yeah. Um, and you're always talking about this regulation, the FDA and Fish and Wildlife.
Yeah.
Was there any stumbling block with them, or is it just these are the rules and then you have to follow them, or was there like did you ever have to or ever try to push those rules regulations? Did you find that they hindered you at all, or just kind of went
Yeah,
with
I
it?
mean the oyster farming and sales to the public it's heavily regulated by there are two main regulatory bodies, or three, but on one side is the health department, and it's the state health department, California Department of Public Health, and they're very concerned about the sale of bivalve mollusks because they can make people sick if they're not, if they're polluted, or if they're carrying some disease that can make people sick. So And so we work really closely with them, and it's really important because we want our oysters to be super wholesome and safe to eat, and and they are, and it's because of our partnership with them, really. So we have a really good working relationship with CDPH, but they'll say, you know, you can't sell oysters now, or what. For instance, we test every week for biotoxins because oysters, being filter feeders, can pick up the toxins that might be in certain hazardous algal blooms. So if a bad species of phytoplankton comes into the bay, such as there's one called Pseudonychia, for instance, that produces domoic acid. So if that were to come into our bay in large quantities, it could make the oysters unsafe to eat. So we test for that every week. And we haven't had any domoic acid since, I think, 2016 or something like that. And even then, it was at very low levels. So that simply put us into an alert stage. So the way CDPH works with this is that when they first detect it, even if it's at safe levels, they will say, okay, we've detected domoic acid at a very low level, so you can harvest today because you collected a sample today, but tomorrow you're going to be closed because things could change over a 24 or 48-hour period. The bloom, the algal bloom could get worse. It could spike, something like that. So that's how our harvest has been restricted in the past, just by being in alert levels where we can only harvest on certain days, like just on Tuesday and then again on Friday, that kind of thing.
Has it ever majorly impacted your sales?
It makes it more difficult, but not, but hasn't. Only rarely have we been totally closed, say for a week or two.
Mhm.
Yeah, and so
Yeah. And so,
and then that's one issue, and then another one is just water pollution. We're in an estuary here with 20,000 people living in the watershed. There's also all kinds of dogs and other mammals, and there are gigantic populations of seabirds and wildlife. And all of those can cause fecal coliform or fecal pollution in the water. So that's one of the big worries of all oyster farmers, even oyster farmers that are located in really remote locations, like up in British Columbia, for instance. You could, even in areas like that, you'll have some guy living in a cabin, with a pipe going out to the bay that he's dumping raw sewage in the bay, and it's completely unregulated in those more wilderness situations, or some uh, a cruise ship will come through and pollute the water. So it's a concern for oyster growers everywhere, is water pollution, fecal pollution, so from humans and also from other mammals and birds. And so we test for that constantly. And Morro Bay, one of the reasons Morro Bay has struggled in the past, and uh, is because of the fecal pollution in the bay, and mostly from wildlife, though, mostly birds, but also other things too, including humans. But luckily in Morro Bay we have, it's it, it we have the Water Quality Control Board. We've got people that are, you know, there's oversight in Morro Bay in terms of discharge and pollution, and so we we've done pretty well. The water quality has been quite good, and we're located way back away from people, and it's been pristine and good quality.
yeah.
Yeah.
Is
But
there
it's a
any?
constant worry and something that we're always having to monitor. and we're worried about like homeless encampments in the watershed. There was one down on Turi Road by Los Osos Creek, where Los Osos Creek enters into our bay, and it was getting kind of out of hand. I went down there. There were huge piles of garbage that people were leaving, and I actually found a bucket of human waste that they had left, and I called the sheriff, and the sheriff called the the fire department, and the fire department came down in a big fire truck, and they got rid of this bucket of poop. And so and I called up our county supervisor, Bruce Gibson, and I sent him photos, and he was already aware of of the encampment, and the sheriff was already aware of it, and they're working on it, and things did happen. They got a rollaway dumpster and placed there, and all the trash was cleaned up, and most of the people left. There's still a few cars there, I think.
This is fairly recently.
And the sheriff monitors them, goes by, knows everybody, and is trying to find them places to go. And I think the law is such that you can't just boot people out yet unless you have some place to tell them to go to. Unless you can get an ordinance where a no camping ordinance. And so we're trying to get a no camping ordinance in some of these county areas so that people will camp in just designated camping areas. Okay, cool.
Do you ever have any problems with predators like the sea otters, or is it just kind of cordoned off in the back bay and they don't really go back there?
Oh no, the sea otters are all over the bay, and they've been really reproducing. And the population of sea otters, when I first started, that is one of the changes. When I first started in 2009, there were very few sea otters in the bay, and now they're much more common. So they've done really well, I think. And they can't, or they have a lot of trouble, and they don't tend to get into our oyster cages because they're made of tough plastic that they can't get into. If they were really hungry and desperate, they probably could chew into them and tear them apart, but they haven't tried that. There's so many clams and other things to eat. So we are a bit worried that down the road, as the population of sea otters reaches its carrying capacity, they might get desperate and start going for our oysters and trying to tear into the bags. But I'm not too worried about it because they don't seem to be interested in doing that. And yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and just kind of like wrapping things up.
Uh-huh.
Any good memories you've had while on the job? Any fun
Yeah,
moments?
it's just been really so great to be part of the community and to be able to bring in fresh oysters from our own bay and sell them to the people here. And when we started out, we were selling them for $4.25 a dozen, and to the seafood company, and $5 a dozen to local people, and now it's $20 a dozen. So the good old days of the really cheap oysters are over. It's been gotten more and more expensive to raise them, more and more difficult. But it's been really a great, rewarding, kind of fulfilling to be locked into the community this way and be an integral part of the food production around here, the seafood production, and so that's been really special. And Morro Bay has always had two sides. It's had the tourism and people coming here to enjoy the beach and the bay and to do sport fishing and have fun, but it's also had a commercial side to it too. That's really integral and important to the character of our town, and so we don't want to lose that. And so it's getting harder and harder to be a commercial person on the waterfront now because of the high cost of the real estate and and so and the pressure from all the tourism. But on the other hand, we can tap into those people too and sell them our seafood. Um, and so that's why we have this little market here on the waterfront. And so I think it's a good thing to have all the visitors and to be serving the visitors. But I am a bit worried about losing the character of our town, the commercial side, where we're producing something. We're not just a place to have fun, but we're actually contributing to the high quality seafood that people have to eat. And we've also had a long history of producing energy here in Morro Bay with the three giant stacks. That's what those are for. They're not for bungee jumping, but they were built for producing energy. And so I think that we should keep producing energy. I'm for the battery plant and the wind farms to be a hub for the green energy and producing energy into the future. I think Morro Bay should be both tourism and also doing some of the contributing to the food and energy of our state and our community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, noble cause.
Uh-huh.
You guys raising food for California.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well,
All right.
thanks for speaking
Thank
with
you.
me.